Well, welcome everyone. Everyone has a lot of energy and animation, and we're really looking forward to today's panel discussion. I'm Melissa Bostrom. I'm Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, and I'm really pleased to welcome all of you here today for our panel discussion on the interview process for humanities and social sciences faculty positions. I want to note that today's session and the entire year-long academic job search series are co-sponsored with the Office of Postdoctoral Services, and we have Mark Matheson from the Postdoc Office representing today, video recording our panel discussion, and also with the Duke Career Center and the Versatile Humanists at Duke Initiative. So with that much said, let me turn our attention to introducing our panelists. So everybody on the panel today has a very strong Duke connection, and I think they're going to bring some wonderful perspectives to the conversation. So starting to your left, Dr. Candace Bailey, who is Professor of Music at North Carolina Central University. She earned her Bachelor of Music degree at UNC Greensboro and her Master's and PhD in Musicology from Duke. So we're really pleased to welcome her back. To her left is Professor Michael Carey, who is Assistant Professor in the School of Nursing here at Duke. And he stayed very consistent throughout his educational career. So he holds BSN and MSN degrees with Health Systems Management concentrations from the University of Virginia, and earned his PhD from the University of Virginia School of Nursing. Yes. And then now is a faculty member here at Duke. So welcome to Michael. Thank you. And then finally, to my right is Rod Clare, who is Associate Professor of History and Interim Chair of the Department of History and Geography at Elon University. And he earned his bachelor's degree from Howard University, his master's and PhD in history from Duke. So I'm really glad to welcome him back. So with that said, the format for today, I've shared with our panelists some of the questions that you all shared during the registration process and some kind of common questions that come up around interviewing. So we'll start with those questions, and then feel free to raise your hand if you would like to pose a follow-up question. We'll also have some time at the end for kind of open questions from the audience. We'll keep the formal Q&A panel format until around 4:15, and then we'll break for some informal one-on-one networking. Yes, okay, great. Wonderful. So to get started, the first question, and I'm going to start with Candace, just to give her a fair warning, is how do conference or Skype interviews differ from campus visit interviews? And what are the most important preparations to make for each of those kinds of interviews?
All right, at NCCU, the conference interview is typically more common than the Skype interview. We don't always have the infrastructure to allow us to easily Skype as a group, so conference calls are more frequent. And for us, the conference call or the Skype is an intermediary between the submitted materials and spending more money on bringing people to campus. So it's kind of, if you want to make it a long list, to go to the short list, or the short list to go to the 2 or 3 candidates we would bring on campus. And they are, as you know, these have to be highly structured. For us, I think it's pretty standard. We have to ask everybody the same questions. And then you can see where it goes from there. We all know they're awkward, and they're just as awkward for us as they are for you. And just, try to be as, find that line between easy to talk to and yet maintain professionalism, I think, is a really important thing. Don't be too chummy, don't be too flippant, but don't be too cold, if that makes sense. Because it really stands out more on the phone than it does if you're just one-on-one. Advice I would have for them is try to mediate between saying enough and saying too much. And I think I can just remember the faces in the room on conference calls. Somebody just goes on and on and on, and I did this, and it's like, well, we've seen your resume. We know what you've done. Don't, you can highlight a few things if you wish. If the question is worded to do that, but don't go on and keep coming back. Oh, and so I would say that's a really important thing, is not to say too much, but to balance that with saying just enough to get you across to us. So those are things I think that are important to know what you're going to talk about, and you can guess what people are going to ask about, right? Your teaching style, your teaching philosophy, or what kind of courses have you taught in the past. You can guess the kind of questions we'll be looking for, so you can have an idea of what you want to say. And of course, there are always those little things that will branch off from that, but in general, I would advise finding that happy medium between too much and too little. Also, and this would go for any of the preparations you do when you're applying, is to know the institution. To know the institution that you're applying for. Don't let it be kind of cavalier that you don't know that we don't have an X ensemble. Right? So I'd really like to lead the string band, and we don't have a string band or something like that. So that's one example. I won't go on.
Yeah. I guess what I would add to that is, that the obvious difference between the Skype interview and the on-campus visit is the technology, right? So one of the things I would suggest to folks that are doing a Skype interview is to rehearse and understand what your visual and audio capabilities are. Anticipate limitations in terms of connectivity. Things as simple as if you are looking at your laptop, right? And we all look at the monitor and the screen, but actually what you see is coming from the camera, right? So it's almost like you're having this conversation with someone and they're looking down or they're looking at you. And I think that's pretty common. So the other thing I would suggest is not to take it lightly. Always dress professionally, even with the Skype interview. And know the room in the background, because in addition to the person, if there is distractions going on in the background, noises, that's things that the reviewers or the interviewers can see as well, right? So those are all first impressions that we're getting and feeding into. What I would say about the campus interview is that is a marathon. It's altogether a different beast. I mean, the Skype interview might last maybe 30, 45 minutes. The campus interview is an all-day event from 8 o'clock in the morning all the way to 8 o'clock that night. I mean, literally. I mean, you will get a sample letter from the faculty chair, and it would outline your itinerary for the day. And usually you are interviewing with folks one after another. Every 30 minutes to an hour, you're interviewing with someone else all day long. And then at noon, usually that's when you give your professional talk. And then the afternoon, it continues. And these interviews can be one-on-one or they can be group-based. And at the end of the day, when you're completely exhausted and you're ready to go out to dinner, you may go out with other faculty members that you haven't had the pleasure of meeting and talking to that day. And that process is meant to be a little more laid back, but depending on the people you interact with, it may or may not be, right? So you're still on. Yeah. So my point is, this is an incredibly exhausting process. I remember when I first started, so I'm about 4 or 5 years out from those seats now, and I interviewed with several different institutions, and Duke was by far the most challenging, not because the people were challenging, but it was just the most rigorous. They had me on a schedule from 7:30 that morning to 8 o'clock that night, and it was pop, 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 pop the whole entire way. So try to get some sleep if you can. I never sleep before interviews or presentations just because I'm always nervous, but just prepare and prepare and prepare. That professional talk I think is critical, because oftentimes the people who come to your talk are the people that are interested in your science or your teaching philosophies and things like that. So it's very important, and those are the people that oftentimes provide or will provide evaluations on your professional talk, right? So it's very important that you tell that story about your research area or your teaching interests, and then you engage with the audience quite a bit, right? What else can I say about the campus visit? that's pretty much it. It's really like, I guess the Skype versus the campus visit is like the sprint versus the marathon, right? They're very different, but very important. As Candace said, they're oftentimes coupled, right? Because of the enormous amount of expense that it takes for me to bring you to Duke from LA or New York, we have to feel pretty comfortable about this candidate coming here and showcasing what we can provide to you and what you can contribute to us. And so it's a challenging process, but the Skype interview is very important as first impressions go. But still, I think you can't take it very lightly. Okay.
Well, I think both of them have covered the topic well. I just add a couple of things for both the Skype and for the on-campus interview. One is might sound flippant in terms of Skype interviews. What I've heard nowadays hasn't happened on my campus when we do Skype interviews. And we primarily do Skype interviews and on-campus interviews. We don't do like telephone interviews. Is that they might ask you to stand up. I don't know if you've heard of it. Like some people will dress, but they'll get dressed from like the waist up, and on the bottom they have.
And I'm not sure why they would do that. That's to me.
Yeah, but I'm saying I've heard of it, and they want to see that you're professional. Like
okay.
The idea is that you're not. Oh yeah, you know, I'm dressed with a tie, but then I just got my pajamas or shorts on or sneakers. So hasn't happened on my campus. I don't think we plan, but depending on what institution you might be Skyping, you might want to just fully dress.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hurt you, and it wouldn't hurt you to fully dress, right?
I don't think I would want to work in an institution that would do that. That sounds brutal.
I'm just saying, it's out there, and you can make that decision based on whether they ask you that, right? Another thing about Skype interview, and this is, as Michael said, one, you want to practice it. You may have a friend that has, everyone has a cell phone basically, so you might have someone that just records you, and then you could look at it and say, do you sound nervous? Are you speaking down? Are you projecting your voice? Are you turning slightly left, slightly right, or are you just like a laser beam? And so that's something you can work on. Also, one thing that I would add that the two panelists have to add is that you might want to find out who is doing the Skype interview with you. Like they'll usually, if you ask the chair of your department, they might say, these are the 4 or 5 professors. We do that whenever, these are the 4 or 5 professors that's going to be interviewing you. So you might just get a feel for their faces, and like their areas of research within your general field. So that's just a good little topic. So you can say, hey, Dr. Carrigan, Dr. Matthews, Dr. Claire, Dr. whoever. So it's not kissing up, but it's just showing that you're aware of who's in the department. And I think that is a good thing to do. And as he pointed out, it's usually the same questions are asked to all the candidates. We may flip the order in which we ask them. So question number 5 for one candidate, maybe question number 3 for another candidate. But pretty much, you're going to get the same question everyone is asked. And one other point is that we usually ask you, are there any questions that you have for us? We welcome that opportunity to show that you've done research on the institution that you're applying to. So if you're like, no, I'm cool. That may work depending on how well they interview. But if you said, oh, I see that you have a really good, let's just say for history department of history geography, we have a very, very good study abroad program. So I see that you have a program in Florence and a program in Costa Rica and a program in London. Are you thinking of expanding somewhere in Asia in the future? Or, a question like that shows you know the program and you're thinking about it and maybe where you might fit in down the road. So that, in terms of the Skype, is the points I make. They both make fine points, so I won't belabor that. In terms of the on-campus interview, ours is even longer. It's a day and a half. So ours goes from basically like 7:30 up until 9 p.m. when the dinner's over. And I would count the dinner as a kind of formal event. You're being evaluated. And the reason is the people are interviewing are basically thinking, do I want to be with this person for the next 20 to 30 years? Seriously, I mean, that's part, because we've seen the CV, we've seen your resume, you got through the Skype. Right. Now, one of the reasons they brought you on campus, besides you have to see the provost and the dean and a bunch of other people, is, what's the mesh like? Yeah. So that is one thing that I would take that as serious at 8:30 at night that I did at 7:30 in the morning. An advice for that is that, say like if you're interviewing at, I don't know, USC Charlotte, this may not be you, but suppose you go to somewhere like Colorado or LA. sometimes they'll fly you in, but the night before, so you get in at like 9:30 that night, then you have to start at 7:30 that morning. If possible, can you ask them, or their program assistant or whoever is booking the tickets, can you get me in that morning? So you have a day to just get used to the time shift or just relax, instead of you being buzzed from traveling all day and you can't go to sleep and then you're up the next morning. So that would be another tip. So besides what they said, I think that's all I add to that.
Great, thank you. Thanks all.
She has a question.
Oh, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I'm actually curious to hear more about, like, what are your typical Skype interview questions, or any kind of interview questions? I have a vague sense it'll be about, but I'd love for, like, some
Specific
ones to prepare.
Absolutely. What's your name?
Diana.
And what field are you?
I'm in religious studies.
Religious studies. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, not exactly. Humanities, history, and so not exactly. One of the things that we might ask is, so I see that one of the things that we're trying to increase in our department is upper level classes in, let's say, European history. I see that you've taught a European history class on Western Europe. Do you have any background on Eastern Europe? Are you thinking of developing that in the next 2 to 4 years? And then the person can say, oh yes, even though I haven't developed a class, I've taken a class in Eastern Europe with such and such a professor. I've written an article on this topic, and one of the things that I want to do and definitely develop is continue on my Eastern European trajectory, because that's one of the things that attracted me to your department.
I find that in the School of Nursing, generally we ask broad questions on the Skype interview. Like, for example, in hiring tenure track research faculty, we'll ask them things about, why are you interested in this position? Other things might be, what is your research interest? Do you have any current funding? What are your plans for securing future funding? Okay. What else? Some other questions. Have you had opportunities for leadership? And if so, could you expand and share with us what those opportunities have been? They're more feelers.
What attracted you to the school?
Yeah.
What attracted you?
In the beginning for the Skype interview.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, the on-campus interview is a little more intensive, and their questions are a little deeper thought, I think.
We would ask more general questions as well,
Okay.
and they tend to be ones, how do you see yourself fitting in with our program? Being in the music department, if you're coming to work with the marching band, how do you see yourself interacting with other members of the, or how do you feel the integration of other faculty support for the band who aren't involved? I mean, just kind of that kind of a question. We also want to know, we will ask some sort of question that deals with your personal relationship, not personal relationship, your collaborative skills. So can you tell us a type of collaboration you may have been working on within your department or in another department? Can you tell us about your interactions with students? Can you tell us about a problem and how you work with students to get to some solution to that problem? Those kinds of things.
The other thing I would add to that is, when I was in my PhD program, I had the opportunity to actually serve on the faculty search committee. And so, believe me, that's an opportunity for all of you, and I would seek out the faculty search chair and ask them if they have student representation. If not, could you join the committee? And more likely than not, they would say yes.
Let's
right?
work.
Because it's a very labor-intensive series of job searches and scheduling, you name it. And so the more people involved, it kind of lessens the burden and the struggle for the entire group. And that gives you specific questions, right, in your department. And it gets you thinking about, well, how would I answer this question if I was asked this question, And from there, you can start to jot notes for yourself. And then you're prepared going into your own interview when you finish. I think it's a very good strategy, and I would suggest to you that you use that strategy at every level. Like right now, I'm in my 5th year in the School of Nursing, and I serve on the PhD Program Director Faculty Search Committee, right? Because That's something I volunteered for, that's something I'm interested in, but that's also something I'm aspiring to, right? And so a lot of the questions we're creating together. And so when that time comes for me to look for that position, I'm prepped and I'm ready, right?
Could you also elaborate on the campus visit questions? Because you said it's a series of meetings, so I'm wondering if you're getting more or less the same questions at each meeting, or does it vary according to whom you're meeting?
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. I think the campus interviews definitely vary more than the Skype interviews, because one thing that we do is that we have students in our major sit down with the candidate and interview, in a sense, interview that person, and we leave the room. And then we will talk, once the candidate leaves, like the following couple days, tell us what you thought about that candidate. So, and we don't script those questions. But other times, they're meeting with, as the provost of the school, the dean of the school, the chair of the department. They're meeting with related faculty. So for example, we just hired a geographer this year, and one of his concentrations is on the Middle East. So we had people in political science that came and wanted to talk to him because they're interested in, whoever we hire as a geographer, can we work with this person in our field as well? And we can't necessarily regulate the questions that the political science is going to ask that person. And as he said, it goes on all day. I mean, ask for those bathroom breaks as much as you can. Yeah. Just run for 5 minutes, get right, okay.
Yeah, to regroup.
What's going to happen next? Seriously.
Yeah, but one of the things that always strikes me with the campus interviews and just how much they go on is that there are going to be people who are at everything, and they will have heard this already a lot, and sometimes that's okay, but if your answers are not specific, then it becomes, oh, they don't really know this, they really don't have an answer for this question, that kind of thing. To be careful about. I think each of the higher-ups will have their own interests in the university at large. More questions about service, which is really important in our institution. What committee work have you done, or how do you feel about committee work, or what interests might you have, and those kinds of things.
I would say, so I don't believe there is a great deal of interaction between the interviewers prior to the interview, right? Well, you know what, Candace, I'm going to ask this, so what are you going to ask, and things like that. I don't think that really goes on a great deal. Like the search committee, usually that's a group interview, and there may be 3, 4, 5 people asking you questions. And depending on your interests in the position you're applying for, such as, like I said, if it's research intensive, then they'll ask you a lot of questions about your research and strategies for obtaining additional funding to continue your research. Have you thought about collaborations with other schools, particular people within the school and outside the school, things like that. I do think on occasion, I had this one interview, and I was asked a pretty uncommon question, which was, in nursing, there's a faculty shortage, right? And so, I believe it was individuals from the search committee of this particular institution asked me what did I think about the nursing shortage, and how, what might be some strategies that we should consider to address the shortage, right? And as a nurse, you think about those things, maybe not really deeply, but because at that point I had not been in administration or anything like that. I was just trying to get a job. But I had 1 or 2 responses that I think answered the question well. But sometimes, some of the questions are a little uncommon, and I don't know if you can prep for that. But I can tell you, what I do is every time I interview, I take extensive notes from that interview from the day. So at the end of the day, I'm writing down those questions. So if I'm ever asked that question again, I'm ready for it, right? So that's, and I learn from every single interview. So in theory, right, the interview or your ability to perform well in the interview gets better and better and better.
I want to come back to some of the prepared questions for a minute, and then we can come back to some audience questions. Because I think it would be important to also talk about what makes applicants stand out during these interview processes, and then what are some red flags. So Rod brought up, somebody who asks really sharp questions that show they've done some research is one way to make yourself stand out as an applicant. But I want to also give the opportunity to say, what are some things that you definitely shouldn't do as an applicant in an interview that might be a kind of a red flag? Maybe I'll start with Michael this time.
Sure. So when I think about things that stand out about particular candidates, they usually fall into two buckets, right? They're the tangibles and the intangibles. So the tangibles would be things that generally you glean from the resume or the CV. What funding have they secured as a pre-doc student? Do they show a record of budding publications? Do they have 2 pubs, 3 pubs, 5 pubs? What leadership experiences or opportunities have they been able to take advantage of throughout their graduate studies or their professional work, right? Those are things that you can take and identify pretty easily on the CV. And the reason why those things are important because it's a bit of a forecast into what that student or that professional may be able to do in the future, right? So if they have a really strong history in publishing or securing grant funds from federal institutions or foundations or professional organizations, then there's a good chance that they will continue that, and we want them to continue on that trajectory. The intangibles, one thing that comes to mind, and I think one of you already touched on it, was whether or not they're enthusiastic about the interview. When I have a conversation with you about you coming to the school and us potentially collaborating, right? I'm excited about it because I've read your CV and it seems amazing, and so I want to learn more about you, and I hope that you're excited about it, and I hope that that would project in some way. And if it doesn't, then I wonder how. Whether or not you're just excited about the process. And you really should be excited about the process, right? I can tell you, as a graduate student, I was in school for a long time. And so to get a full-time job and to earn, I have special, but to earn a salary doing what I've tried to hone over years and years and years, right? That, to me, I was stoked. I couldn't get more excited. I'm excited about it now. So and that should surface some kind of way, right? So that is something that is one of the intangible things. But go ahead.
Can I pick back? In terms of something that would be a red flag. Elon University is primarily a teaching university. We value scholarship, and if we have teaching, then scholarship, then service. That's how we rate ourselves. So teaching is number one. So if we have, say, evaluation from a course you have taught, and there are no positive comments, but you taught a lot of different courses, but there are no positive comments in any of them, that would be a red flag for us. Mm-hmm. That would be a red flag for us. Something that is, in a sense, I'm going to not contradict him, but come at it from a slightly different point. In terms of the enthusiasm, say if you're doing a Skype interview, which is the first time we'll get to eyeball you, and I'll just make this comment. Last positions we had for a European historian, a geographer, and an Asian historian. Each had over 120, we had over 120 applicants for each position. Wow. Right? So I agree with them that say, and we usually had 10 people in the Skype, break it down to 10 people. 5 in one day, 5 in the next day. That's how we kind of break it down. Yeah. In terms of intensity, and this is where this goes especially for the European historian and Asian historian, because most of our applicants were not from the United States. So if you're looking for the enthusiasm, in a sense that might be an American attitude, and other countries and cultures don't have that perspective. And so most of the people that, for the European, were from Europe, and most of the people that are Asian were from Asia. And so it would be difficult for us to gauge their interest based on if they were like gung-ho, because they're not from the United States. And so there's this difference in mentality. I'd say be friendly and show interest, but don't be golly gee whiz if that's not your persona and how you grew up.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, for things that stand out for us is that the candidates we talk to know our institution, know what we do in our department, have a clue about our students, and which is, you know, relatively available on the website, right? So there's no reason not to know it. Long list, like I said, they need to be familiar with our institution and what the challenges might be facing as a faculty member that you might be facing here. Red flags, saying things that seem smart, but experience tells the committee you don't know what you're talking about. And people do that. Pat answers, you know, the current lingo without substance, you know, these kinds of things are red flags. We had a search last year, I was chairing, and we were talking to somebody and he was saying this, and we're like, well, can you elaborate more on that? Well, and he just said it again a different way, but he never really elaborated. Well, can you give us an example? Well, I have, you know, and it's just clear to us, you know, if I said, this guy doesn't have a clue. You know, so be careful of that. And there are things that you may, because you haven't done a lot of it, think are the right answers. But you might just think through that a little bit as it applies to different institutions. If it's a teaching institution, or if it's R1 institution, you know, make sure you know what they are looking for.
Can I add one thing? So we're talking about even before they get to the Skype, or as they get to the Skype, I just want to make sure I understand. So the thing that is the most important is that cover letter. Is that letter of introduction or whatever, that 2 to 3 pages. We're reading 120 plus. There's a committee of 5 of us. We're reading 120 plus. And the ones that are informative, yet give you a hint of personality, and it shows a little bit of interest, not just the rote, like you said, the rote material, but you delve slightly deeper into one issue that shows that you have some understanding of it. And I said no more than 2 pages, single space, no more. Because after that, it's a blur, and we got 120 still to look at. But that cover page is the one thing that everybody, not just the committee, but when you get on campus and the whole department has to like review your file, everyone's not going to read all your information, but everyone's going to look at that cover. That, I can say that without a doubt, is the most important thing. I mean, besides not lying on your resume and stuff like that, but in terms of stuff that you can add to or take away from.
Because if you think about it, that's your first encounter with the search committee, right? And if you're a PhD student, chances are the faculty you don't necessarily have a national reputation yet. So they don't know you beyond what's in front of them. And so that's an opportunity to showcase what you've done in a very short, concise way. And it's also, it speaks to your writing ability, right? Which is important. Yeah. So if I can tell you one thing, I agree with Rod, you know, before you send those materials out, they should be proofed and edited.
Not just by you, but by get some of your friends.
Yes, absolutely.
New eyes, get new eyes on it. Yeah. Not just the grammar, but how does it flow? Does it seem stilted? Does it flow? Is it too familiar? You know, that same thing that comes up. Is it too familiar, but is it too cold? Have 3 or 4 of your friends read it over.
One strategy I've used in the past is, in terms of flow, is you know, the trilogy is research, teaching, and service, right? And so I would have essentially 3 paragraphs that touch on each of those sections.
Absolutely. And for us, it would be different. Teaching university, you don't want to have teaching first, then the research, then the service. And that just depends on where you're applying to. I love these questions.
can we shift gears to kind of narrow in on the job talk or teaching demonstration, depending on what that looks like at your institutions? What are key strategies you recommend to preparing the job talk or the teaching demonstration? And we had a couple of specific questions from today's audience. You know, what are the pros and cons about highly specific or highly general job talk? And then what do you think about using multimedia in the job talk? Maybe we'll start with Rod this time.
Okay, yeah. For the job talk, I think that is the time when you want to show your specific specialty. That is the time when you get, it's not a broad-based thing, but if you're working on something specific that, obviously you're researching it because you think it's relevant, and your chair of your dissertation committee thinks it's relevant, I would definitely focus, I would not hesitate to focus in on that, while at the same time recognize, for example, we're in the Department of History and Geography, if someone, as I said, we just hired a new European historian, and she does World War II, Nazi history, and post-World War II history. Most people have a general background, so she doesn't have to explain everything, but there may be a few phrases that you might just want to pull back and explain what they're for. But generally, this is where you shine and show your expertise. Using multimedia, I think, is a good strategy in this day and age. I don't think there's anything wrong with that in your job talk whatsoever.
If you know how to use it.
Yeah, if you know. And so that is another thing you want to find out from the chair. What are they wired? Do you have to bring an adapter if you have a Mac and their PC? You know, if their equipment is PC. Those little questions. You know, are there plugs in the room? Things that you wouldn't think about, but say your battery's on 48%, and then you have to give a 2-hour job talk, and it's winding up. You want to be ready for that. In terms, I'll just say, in terms of the, and I'll let the other people speak a little bit. In terms of, say, giving the teaching talk, that should be a bit broader because we give our teaching talks. We have a class that we're teaching, say, and we'll say the professor that's teaching it, can you step aside and let one of the candidates teach the class? And we were, scheduled that weeks in advance. You're going to come in and discuss, say, the United States during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. It's a general class from the end of the Civil War up until 2015. But you're going to talk about something in the New Deal, 1930, 1938. Up to that, besides that, you can do what you want. So you're speaking to students, and you want to find out, is it an upper level class? Is it like an introductory class? Ask that professor for their syllabus so you can get a feel for what else is that professor, she or he, talked about so far in that classroom. But that one is generally broader because you want to show how well, and it's kind of artificial because the students don't know you. You don't know the vibe for the school. You're coming in really cold, so it's not going to be perfect. But you want to show that you have, in a sense, good rapport with students. You might have different kind of like flyers. You might have PowerPoint projectors. You might ask students to read material from what you're discussing. You might break them up into groups. You might do something that shows, what? Is the professor just going to stand in front of the class and just drone on for 50 minutes? Or are they going to do
One of the things I would, or strategies I would recommend are knowing what we're asking you to teach. Knowing what field, you think that's obvious, but we've had people with PhDs in French apply to teach in our department of music.
French music?
No. And that's a waste of time, obviously. But do you know what we're interested in? We want you to come and teach ear training. Don't come in here and talk about how great you are teaching music history, right? Because we're talking about ear training is what this job is. So know what it is. Look at the course catalog. Look at how the courses are described in the department that you're going to. These are available online. Look at who the people in the department are, as we've talked some about. Things to watch out for is if you talk about your specialty too much, it might sound like you're not a team player. So again, if you can seek connections, I work on this, but I think it'd be great if, we could potentially do something like that, or might want to develop this type of an ensemble, or this type of a program, or, those potential ideas that if you're not asked about, you can bring out in your talks. Multimedia, I've seen it when it's good, and I've seen it when it's not so good, and the fault of the presenter not having their stuff ready or not knowing what slide is next, or heaven forbid typos on the slides. Great if you had somebody look over it, as you mentioned with the cover letter, it might be a good idea. Another good idea is to have somebody listen to you do your talk. So that, and a variety of folks to do that, because we will have people in our department, they do an interview, the students, so meet with the students, and they'll give a little blurb about themselves, and then let the students ask questions. And then they will do some teaching, two different parts of the interview process. And how they interact with the students, we do sit in, we don't leave the room, and we all have the same feedback forms that the students get. But you know, we talk to the students, you know, I said, what did you think of? And they'll give you some ideas about how they warmed up to or not with various people.
I guess I should just clarify, when I said that we left the students, that's separate, it's like a luncheon that they will have with the professor. And then we sit in with the professor, with whoever's visiting, when they're giving their teaching talk, but just let the students for an hour during lunch sit with. So it's two different things. I just want to
Right, yeah. Well, ours is, we're all there, we're there.
Okay.
Well, not all of us, but those who can.
Michael?
I guess I would just add to that is when giving a professional talk, it's important that you tell a story, right? And I don't mean you know, a bedtime story or anything like that. I mean the narrative. You have to construct a narrative that the reviewers or the audience follows, right? So one PowerPoint slide and your talking points logically lead into the next. And it makes sense as to why in undergrad you studied this and you obtain a position at this company, and then from that experience you decided to go back to school and get additional training in that, right? So the audience needs to understand that in understanding your narrative. And I think that goes a long way in terms of presenting your ideas and impressing the group as a whole.
So actually, now I have two follow-ups, but just on that, so how much of your job talk should be of a personal nature, telling your own story versus sharing your research? And then I was also just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what questions we might expect from students, from meeting with students. What questions do undergraduates tend to ask in these kinds of job interviews?
So I would say the job talk is driven based on the audience that you're giving the job talk to, right? So if you're talking to a bunch of researchers and faculty members and things like that, they want to hear about your research. If you're applying for a research-intensive position, they want to hear about your research. But I think it's always a good lead-in to talk about your background and where you came from, and a little bit about what makes you tick and your interests, and then lead into your dissertation work or previous research studies that you've completed.
We hired someone recently, and the two different types of questions from the talk to the faculty and talk to the students. To the faculty, he gave, you know, I grew up here, I started doing this, I went to this school, found interest in this, played with so-and-so, did these things. But with the students, it was like, you know, when I was in 8th grade, I was in the last chair in my section, and I was determined I was going to be in the first chair, and I did it by practicing. You know, and the students can really get into that. And we know this, the faculty knows this is the way it works, but the students, they like to hear, oh, was like me, you know, I can do this kind of thing.
Can you repeat the second question?
So you have talked about meetings specifically with students,
right,
with or without the committee there, especially if it's in an undergraduate focused institution.
Right.
What kinds of questions do these students tend to ask? You know, obviously it's a much different types of questions than people in the search committee are asking. What should we be prepared to hear?
You hear some good questions from what we've determined. You'll hear some good questions. You'll hear, for example, what are your research interests? We encourage a lot of independent study at our institution where the student can take credits, you know, 3 or 4 credits per semester, just doing one-on-one research with that professor. So they want to know, I'm interested in Napoleon, and I know that you do, you know, early modern European history. Is Napoleon something that if you came here that you feel comfortable working with students with. So they're trying to get that kind of information. Other types of things, how many pages do you sign per week when you teach a class? And they want to know, like, you do over 100 pages. You know, they want to know that kind of stuff as well. So you get these serious questions, and they get, this person's going to just be just hard.
I would say you may get a question such as, if I'm the student and you're the faculty member interviewing, have you worked with students in the past, and if so, in what capacity? Have you helped students secure pre-doctoral funding through the National Institutes of Health, things like that?
Samantha, you had a question a while back. Do you
I
want to jump
did.
in
It's
with
not
that?
related to the current discussion.
That's okay. You can jump
Okay.
in.
Throw it in before we go.
You were speaking about taking notes at the end of the day. And I was just wondering if it is done or should definitely not be done to say take your notebook into an interview so that you can take notes.
I've always taken my notebook with me. Yeah,
And
just
that's
like
okay.
this.
I think that's a wise thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It also shows, to me, it shows interest.
Right, you're
like
prepared.
you're still
Yeah.
a student at heart, taking notes and learning.
Yeah.
I recommend it too, because sometimes you get a two-part question and you may not remember
Right.
both parts, and if you're taking the notes, then you'll know what the other
Absolutely.
part is.
I guess the question would be, would you bring a laptop versus a paper thing? I guess that would be the question now, you know.
Well, certainly not a 5-star notebook, but something like this would be great.
Yeah.
This is pretty typical.
Great, thank you. So another topic that's come up in the conversation is the number of different people that candidates meet with during the on-campus interview, right? So you might meet with faculty in the department that you're interviewing with, faculty in other departments, students. But also we haven't mentioned, chairs, deans, provosts. What kinds of questions can candidates expect from those folks? Are there kinds of standard questions that chairs and deans and provosts ask that might help folks prepare?
I can speak to the chairs, becoming a new chair in my department. One of the things that we'll want to find out is, how do you see yourself not just not just contributing, but what new areas do you see yourself bringing to our department that we didn't have beforehand? So I'll give you a quick example. I do U.S. history, but one of my fields here was in Canadian history, because my DGS at the time was from Canada, and he taught Canadian history, and he said, Rod, you're going to go out in the field, there's going to be a lot of people applying for U.S. history positions. One of the things that you can do to, in a sense, sell yourself is to have that little difference to you. But still related. It's not like I was doing that and then say Thailand. Like U.S. and Thailand. U.S. and Canada, they're related but separate. So that would be one thing that we'd ask. How do you see yourself fitting into our program for the next 5 to 10 years down the road? We don't, unlike from basically what Mike said, we don't expect historians or geographers to bring money to our department. It's a different kind of field, so that wouldn't be a question that, I guess, you're in the humanities that you might get so much. But what publications do you see yourself possibly publishing in the next 3 to 5 years, for example? Or what type, relating to what conferences have you attended, or what do you, if there are type of conferences that you like to present, not just attend in the next 3 to 5 years, what, is that AHA, which is the big one for historians, American Historical Association, or depending on regional ones, there's the Southeastern American, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think one question that maybe everyone knows to be prepared for is research budget, what you might want it for, what you might do, what type of, if you were given some money, what kind of new program or ensemble or course might you like to develop that is not on the books there now?
Right.
But what might you be able to do that's either entirely new or that meshes with some of the ideas but more fully, or brings them to a different level, is one of the things to be prepared for. I think with the deans and the provost, I think it pays to be prepared for a short meeting. They only have a few minutes, and they may not know much at all about your discipline. And so it's kind of the elevator speech, academies, right? So be able to sell yourself and what you do and why you're good and why you want to be there. Because that's something you're going to be asked at many different levels is, why do you want to come to this school? And you need to have some specifics about the school itself. It also wouldn't be a bad idea to check out who they are on their websites. If you went to Central, our provost is a historian, so maybe you can make a connection there. Or maybe they went to the same school you did, or some other types of connections that help you stand out in addition to just your research.
Yeah, I had some notes I jotted down. You have to be able to articulate your worth, right? Just like Rod and Candace said, you know, why are you unique? You know, can you tell me why you think you're unique? What contributions can you make? How might you support the department? You need to have these ideas in mind, not just because you're great or you had this funded study, but it needs to be in a way that is articulate and is clear and is something that's thought out, right? The other thing I would say is you talked about a package. So in our school, in most schools, they talk about the startup package, right? What are the resources in your mind that you think about that would make you successful here? What are the resources that you need? Do you need access to an editor? Do you need access to data management? Do you need access to statisticians? Do you need administrative support? You know, do you need a specific laptop that's powerful to do very complicated analyses and things like that? You know, have you thought about those things? And if you have, you need to articulate to the dean or others why those things are very important for you to be successful at this institution.
And in the case, if I may add, at a teaching institution, how that's going to help your teaching. You can't just say, I want to do this for my own research purposes. We need to know how that's going to reflect in your teaching.
Follow-up question?
Yes, just on this topic, I wonder how does the provost or dean intervene in the decision making about who to hire? Like they're not going to sit on the committee meetings deciding.
Right. I'll just jump in first. Usually what happens is that we as a department will make our decision. And we will, usually 3 or 4 people that we'll bring on campus over a 2-week period. And we'll rank them 1 through 4. And then, but we won't necessarily tell the provost or dean, but we'll say, here's our #1 position. We want Susan Smith to be our new historian. They may say for some reason they did a background check, something. We have questions about, when we interviewed with them, we had some questions. They didn't really articulate Elon's vision for where we want to be in the next 20 years. They seem to be much more interested in research than teaching, and that was the vibe that we got as the provost or dean. So sometimes they might say, we're not enthusiastic about that person. Rarely I have not seen them actually block someone, but I've seen them be less than enthusiastic about someone. And I've seen them be very enthusiastic. We agreed to what you guys said. I'll get them on the phone this afternoon. So that's how it works at Elon.
I would say the buck stops with the dean. You know, the faculty search committee will make recommendations, and the dean trusts that the faculty search committee has done their homework and that they have investigated these candidates thoroughly. But at the end of the day, you know, if the dean's like that or like that, the decision lies with the dean for us.
For us, it differs. If it were a first-person assistant professor position, it would be, again, like Michael said, the faculty makes recommendations, but we don't make the choice. The chair also would enter in their thoughts and would send all this to the dean, and the dean would make the decision for that. If it's a higher level, it's the provost that makes the decision.
For this next question, I'd like to start with Candace, and that is, what are some excellent questions that you've heard candidates ask? what would be some tips and strategies that you could share with everybody? Because you have to ask a lot of good questions of the different people that you meet in these interviews.
One that always strikes us is when somebody brings it out has to do with, well, in general, it's the questions that we didn't ask but perhaps we should have asked, and that that we should have touched on that, and you bring that up. So, for example, accreditation, aspects of accreditation. I see you're accredited, or I see you're not accredited. Do you have plans to become accredited by whatever body does the accrediting for your discipline in the next few years? Or if you are going through it, where are you in that process? And how are you set up to do that process? If the candidate says something like that, it says, wow, they're really thinking like a faculty member. They're not just thinking about their own stuff, but they're thinking about part of the whole, the group, department. So that's one thing that, as an example of the type of questions that really stand out for us. And the other one for us is, being a music department, what kind of opportunities do you find, speaking to us, to interact in the community at large in your discipline? In other words, are there a lot of places for me to play or that kind of thing, which is important if you have community service as a big part of your service in your job. We're always looking for outreach and community service in our faculty members. So showing that you have an interest in going out and doing that and making our brand known, even if we haven't mentioned that, is another good thing.
I would just say, not necessarily questions, but I think it's very impressive when candidates, particularly newer candidates, out there programs, think about how they will add value to the department or to the institution at large. I'm interested in developing this organization, or I'm interested in developing this specialty so that I can develop this particular class. So I think that's always impressive where when a student has thought about that process to the point where, if given the opportunity, they're ready to operationalize it.
I would say, and this is particularly true for the humanities, that past 6 or so years since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, we've had a drop in enrollment in the humanities fields, including history and geography, and the business fields and communication. There's certain fields that have taken off, and we have declined, not just at Elon, but throughout the country, history programs. So if they said, and we had a couple of people say this, I have a couple of ideas for potentially increasing the amount of majors. Have you guys started working on any programmatic efforts to increase the amount of majors that you have? That was good. That was good. That showed that person was really thinking about the field, not just now, but down the road, and our line's going to get cut if we don't have funding from the provost 10 or 15 years down the road. That kind of idea. Like, depending on your field, what's enrollment like? Has it been steady? Is it going up, going down? I'm more than willing to try and come in as a lead professor. Here are a couple of ideas that I've been thinking about in terms of how we could possibly increase enrollment. That is key.
So I want to loop back to a kind of topic that came up earlier, which is the next question on your list, and that is communicating enthusiasm. So we talked about there are different kind of culturally, sensitive ways to communicate enthusiasm. Some of them very specific to U.S. culture, but then there's also kind of an extrovert, introvert, different ways of communicating enthusiasm. So, help us think about what to a search committee might communicate enthusiasm, even if it isn't, rah-rah, excitement. What are some ways that you've seen candidates communicate enthusiasm that aren't necessarily that kind of rah-rah?
Well, Rod just touched on it, which was the candidate had thought about the field overall, and that if given the opportunity, he or she has developed strategies to increase enrollment. That's exciting for a faculty member to hear.
So it's not you with pom-poms cheering, but that's big. That's big.
The other thing too, I am naturally introvert, so it takes a lot of energy out of me to project and to be on all day long. As a strategy, what I often do is I take frequent bathroom breaks, right?
Like I said, yeah.
Seriously, and I'll go to the bathroom and I'll go off and I'll jump around and bounce around a little bit to kind of regroup, because it's an exhausting process, and engaging and talking all day, just I'm wiped at the end of the day. So
I would also suggest, if you think you're going to be in this position, that you talk with the folks that you have here at Duke, because I was called before last by somebody in the graduate school to work with one of the music graduate students who was having some of these issues, and just to meet, to talk about things, that just a different face. And they put us together, and we met a few times, and just it was a confidence thing, and it was a cross-cultural thing, and it was also made more intense by gender issues. So having someone to talk to, and Duke does a really good job of putting these things together, has made a difference. At least I know for this student, and I think that if you know that this might be something that you might have a concern about, to talk and use the resources here.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about those kind of informal or formal conversations that happen over meals, over dinners and lunches and breakfast. And we know some of the topics to avoid during those. But what are some topics that would be safe or ways to start a conversation during those meal times? So maybe I'll start with Michael this time.
I would say for sure a safe topic would be what are some of the professional opportunity or training opportunities here for new faculty, right? That's a good, safe question. I think another good way to kind of break the ice, particularly here at Duke, is talk about Coach K or Duke basketball, right? I think, because there's just this common enthusiasm and excitement about the athletic programs here, it's just an easy way to talk about something that isn't full of pressure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're not a basketball enthusiast.
I think if you can, let them lead first in the conversation, but then who knows, you may be out to dinner with someone who's also an introvert, right? Might pick up on current activities of the department. If they've just had a symposium on X, how did that go? Was it good attempt to talk about? Show that you know what's been going on in the department or in the school. Is someone doing particularly interesting research that you'd like to know more about? That shows your interest as a colleague and potential for collaboration as well. It also shows that you've heard of them, and that sort of a kind of, back patting, or however you want to call that, smooching, or is not bad. A little bit, just a little bit. And if it's going well, ask about connections in the area. Do you like living in Durham? Those kinds of
things.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you want to ask about are there movie theaters? Is a lot of, depending on wherever you go, are there arts in the area? Do you have to travel far? If are there jogging trails? Like if you like to jog or work out or exercise, those kind of things. Yeah. Keep politics and religion out there.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Great.
I'd love to hear questions if you guys had follow-up questions for me.
I have a follow-up question for that one. I know that there are rules about what you can and can't ask about marriage status and things like this. If you get a kind of question, or do you have any and one of the things I've heard is if you're not married and you don't have your lovely partner and kids to talk about, are there should you talk about hobbies or something like that to kind of give yourself a personal side without, and if you get a question that's off base that you don't think they're supposed to ask, or their strategies for how you should respond.
So I would say, in terms of, say you don't have a spouse. I don't have a spouse. I don't have any children. So you might just want to talk about, I love movies.
Okay.
I love movies. I like the Hollywood stuff and the artsy kind of stuff. So I talk about that. I like to jog and work out. So, you'll want to find out, is there a gym in the area? Do the faculty, we had like a pickup basketball thing on Fridays, or little jogging groups that we have in our department. So, you know, there's stuff like that that happens in the department. You guys hang out pretty much, you know, this is important. We are a very collegial department. Some departments are, depending on the size and, you know, if there are one versus teaching university. So there are definitely ways to get around that, you know, as if you're single or whatnot. In terms of inappropriate questions, you know, that's a really good one, because we have not had that experience as of yet. Thank goodness. So for example, if someone asks you, are you married, or what's your sexuality, you know, something like that, that might be something, hey, I would just say, I'm not sure it's appropriate at this time for me to answer that question, but if things work out for both of us in the future, maybe that's a topic we could pick up on in the future.
Yeah.
You know.
I think you should also hope that there'll be, I mean, it's happened kind of on a couple of occasions. And I know I would say, Michael, you can't ask that question. You know, hopefully somebody else on the committee will say,
I've had that experience.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah.
But if not,
there were 2 occasions where I was asked, you know, things that were protected classes like family and family size and things like that. And I remember on one occasion, the faculty member asked me a question, and another faculty member immediately followed up and said, no, you can't ask that question. And then we just moved on.
Yeah.
In another case, I was asked about was I interested in having a family or having more kids. I can't remember how it was phrased. And like Grad said, those things are protected classes, right? But you don't want to be alienated, right? Or I want to say rude, or you put it in a very good way where it's very soft and subtle. But I think my response at that time was, no. I said, well, I think my family's the perfect size right now. Right? Perfect size right now.
Could be one.
Yeah. Well, at the time it was 2. Well, it was 3 actually. So you know, I was being very honest. Like, I'm up to here with kids. But that's how I chose to respond.
What about folks who might be navigating the faculty career search with a partner or spouse who's also navigating an academic job search? What's the right time, and is there a right time in the interview process to bring that up?
It's never happened. For us, it's never happened.
Not in my experience either.
And none of my experience either. I don't know what that's saying, but that hasn't happened. We've had people that got married once they got to another faculty member in our departments. Once they both were there, but they were single before they got around.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, I could be really wrong here, but I think that's sort of when the university is interested in even broaching that sort of a thing, that it's going to be not at the assistant professor.
yeah, you're a star of some.
You're going to bring somebody in,
Yeah.
and then I
Definitely socio.
yeah.
But it's a good question. That's a good question.
I had heard that that spousal hires they're not nearly as common as they used to be, say, 20 years ago, but sometimes there's more opportunities for like a lectureship, or you can teach a class here or there. Is that something you've heard, or is that?
Adjuncting, you know, and that's another issue. That's another potential fact. But yes, are you saying within the same department or just at the school itself?
Probably either one.
Okay. That has happened in our department level, but it was always made expressly that this is not like a permanent thing, that they're just going to keep adjuncting for 10 or 20 years. We have positions that are open for another 2 or 3 years, and that person could adjunct for those time. We'll give priority to that person, but we made it explicit this is not a long-term commitment. So something to get them stabilized, get them on their feet, and then maybe they can apply to other schools within the area, you know, UNC or Wake Forest or wherever they're thinking about. Oh, sorry, I had a question. But it was kind of on this idea of what's inappropriate questions. And I know I've had our last professor that we just hired is female, and I say that for a specific reason because I know that a lot of the younger women professors wonder how they should dress when they come to an interview. Like, should you wear a dress or should you wear a pantsuit? And if you wear a pantsuit, does that mean X? Without getting into what the X is, or are you seen as more traditional and less threatening if you wear a dress or a skirt? Or how much jewelry should you wear? Should you wear no jewelry whatsoever? So, as I said, I don't know if you've heard that amongst yourselves. Is that a point of conversation if other people on the panel have heard it? My advice is that wear what you feel comfortable with. If you don't feel comfortable wearing whatever you wear, then it's probably not a good place for you. Like if you just can't stand dresses for whatever reason, don't wear a dress. I would say obviously you're not going to become blinged out. Like you're earrings and something, but you're not just going to be dripping with gold or anything. There's decorum. But in terms of wearing, as I said, I don't know how common this is. You guys can tell me, that was an issue 5 or 10 years ago. We don't hear about that anymore. I'm just older.
I think we have time for maybe one more question in the formal Q&A. All right, jump in.
So I have a question about internal applicants, and if you have any experience either on kind of the hiring, the faculty search committee side, or yourselves in the job search process of applying to the institution where you are going to get your doctorate or where you've got your doctorate from, and what are some of the pitfalls of that, and what are some of the advantages of that might not be readily kind of available to think about.
Start there because past couple years we had someone that was a visiting assistant professor and applied for the tenure track position that he was a visiting assistant professor for. What I'm not giving away an answer, but what we found problematic is that he asked questions to us when we did the Skype interview that someone that had never stepped foot on the campus would have asked. Like, he had been there for a year. So we expected like an elevated set of questions because you know how many students we teach, is the maximum that we teach. You know how long the classes last. Those kind of basic questions that he was asking just made us say, okay. Right? So, but the thing that can be beneficial is that you know the institution, and based upon that, like, I saw that, when I was at the department meeting that we're still thinking about getting funding for X, Y, or Z. And one of the things I've been doing, as a visiting professor is thinking about that very question. And here's my solution or proposition for that question. So it can be something that's beneficial to you if you bring up something that, because of your insight, you know about it. But if you're asking the same question that someone would have asked that came from Oklahoma, then that's problematic.
Yeah, well, again, that hasn't come up for a tenure track job for us.
I would argue that it's beneficial for you to go outside the institution. Why? Because you've been in that institution for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, however long you've been in your graduate studies or program. For better or for worse, right? There have been an impression made about you. And that can help you if there's a good impression. It may not help you if there's not so good of an impression. But going outside of that institution gives you the opportunity to interact with new colleagues, a new institution, maybe a different philosophy. And to me, I think it bodes well in terms of helping you in your professional development.
And I'm sorry.
And if you're interested in going back to your home institution, look how much stronger you've positioned yourself by going out, showing that you have become successful in rising through the ranks and doing the things you need to do to be promoted, and now you're presenting yourself again for an associate professor position, or a full professor, or a director position, right?
All right, one last question.
All right. I'm an international student, so I'm interested in the way the faculty or the search committee evaluates international versus the domestic applicants. in terms of their cross-cultural abilities and communication skills. For example, actually, because although I've lived here for 5 or 6 years, I don't know all the cultural figures that Americans talk about. So is it an obstacle you take into the consideration? So.
I'll start on that because I, in a sense, addressed that earlier when I said that we hired a European historian, we had a search, and we just hired one. She's in her 2nd year. We had an Asian historian, and we just hired her, and she's in her 3rd year. So we had 4 people come on campus for each position. Out of those 8 people, 6 of them were not from the United States. Right? And so the person that we hired for the European position was from Germany, and the person that we hired for the Asian position was from China. She had gone to graduate school, both of them had gone to graduate school in the US, but had been here for like 6 or 8 years, kind of like where you are right now. I think one of the things that it adds is diversity. Because one of the things that Elon likes to stress, and I think this would be, most schools will stress that we want to have diversity in as many forms, whether that's socioeconomic, whether that's racial, whether that's cultural, life experiences. So you bringing a different perspective than someone that's born in the United States and raised in the United States, but has lived in and knows something, not everything, but knows some things. That's good not only for the institution and the department, but for students as well when they see someone, because one thing that we are starting at Elon the past 10 years is bringing more international students. So they like to see international professors as well. So I think that's something not to shy away from, not to feel, but it's a selling point.
I think we have a very diverse faculty at NCCU. Lots of, it's really quite impressive, I think, for considering how small we are. So I think it's a positive. And as far as not always getting cultural references, I can tell you that in my 19th year of being at Central, I'm finding that even my cultural references are
I would say in the School of Nursing, diversity and inclusion is a core value for us. Those things are very important. I think those are an advantage. I think there are advantages for many ways. One, there are cultural differences. They help our graduate students. For example, we have several different African Americans that we recruited into the program now, right? They are all interested in working with different faculty members on different research projects, right? But there is a cultural connection between me and them, right? And so having diverse faculty on board helps bridge those connections very easily. So I think it's a particular strength.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask that we go ahead and stop the formal Q&A at this point so that we have some time for kind of one-on-one conversations while the panelists are still available, because I know some folks have to leave promptly at 4:30.
I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem.
I'm free to stay Chapel Hill.
No problem. So will you please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.